Building materials manufacturers run a complex business, but we are here to help you plan for the future. Whether you are launching a new product, rebuilding a brand, trying to get thoughtful communication strategies in place, or everything in between. Here on Constructing Brands, we will be talking with leading experts in construction, architecture, engineering, marketing, and manufacturing to help make your building materials company stronger and more profitable. With 15 plus years of experience helping building materials companies succeed and grow, your host, Eric Linnell.
Good morning. Well, actually, I think it's good afternoon. It's about 2:00. I am so happy to have on today a gentleman who I met, a week or two ago, who has a passion for this industry and who is making a difference. And I loved the way he was discussing brand and how he understood brand, but also the environment. So I'm so happy to have on today Kenn Bush. Kenn, thank you for joining us today on Constructing Brands.
Thank you, Eric. Pleasure to be here.
So Kenn, can you share with us just a quick little bit about your background? And I know, Kenn, Material Intelligence is the name of your company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Share with us kind of who you are and what Material Intelligence is and why it's important for our folks to know about it.
Sure. So I have been a journalist in the furniture and interior design industry since 1990. And I started out very focused on furniture materials and manufacturing, covering that commercial and residential furniture from the manufacturing production side. Started to weave into more decorative surfaces and marketing and use of decorative surfaces and how it fits into the larger global furniture design world. Started working with a bunch of companies out of Europe, mostly Germany. And that led to me creating educational content on materials for architects and interior designers. So coming out of knowledge of production and then a deeper based knowledge of materials and design, and then trying to connect that to how architects and interior designers specify these materials. For the last 15 years or so, I've been creating educational CEUs, giving presentations, consulting with companies, but really trying to help a segment of the materials industry that always thinks of itself as a commodity or a technical product, and figuring out how they can tell a better story to people who specify on design, on performance, and now on sustainability. So that's where Material Intelligence LLC is based. As part of the whole sustainability journey, I have been doing a lot of research into specifically engineered wood, composite wood materials, and carbon sequestration. And that has led to a whole new movement we're calling climatepositivenow.org, which is based on some global messaging from companies like IKEA and H&M. But the composite wood world, anybody who designs and builds with wood has a distinct advantage because of wood's inherent properties.
So what kind of sparked the passion to specific? Is it about, I mean, have you always been just an environmentalist? Is it take a step back? Why this?
Sure. Well, so as part of creating educational content for architects and designers, I could see a lot of sustainability messaging starting to form, going back a decade and more now.
Sure.
But a lot of it seemed highly suspect. And working closely with the Composite Panel Association and major producers like Arauco and Uniboard and Tafisa of these products, they had some research they were sitting on that I could not figure out why they were not shouting from the rooftops. And that basically is because of wood's natural properties. Trees absorb carbon. They actually absorb CO2 as they grow, right? Through photosynthesis, they break the carbon off that. Carbon becomes part of the lignin, the cellular structure of trees, and they release the oxygen part. So that's why absorbs carbon, releases oxygen. To the degree that...
I'm going to take a breath right now. I'm going to take that in. Okay, I got it.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, this is I live this every day, so I forget that it's breaking news. See, and this is the problem. But what we found through some life cycle assessment and a lot of other research is that, say, every sheet of particle board, 4x8 sheet of particle board, is actually sequestering 40 pounds, at least 40 pounds of carbon
Okay.
that the trees captured as they were growing, right? And that is more than enough carbon that is needed to offset all the carbon released in the production and use of those panels. So that is the terminology would normally be carbon negative. You and I had a
Yeah.
discussion about what a tough term that is for a lot of people to kind of wrap their heads around. So that's why IKEA and some of these other brands are using climate positive
Interesting.
to describe any product or process that absorbs and sequesters more carbon from the atmosphere than is released in its use.
Wonderful. And so I've never spoken to Superman before, but you're clearly trying to save the planet.
This is what I learned. So in addition to presenting to architects and designers, I've spent a lot of time in front of design classes and working with
Okay.
design professors. So universities, tech schools, with interior design and architecture classes. And I had a professor tell me basically, if you want to connect with the millennials, and this is going back a few years now, the Zoomers are part of this.
Yeah.
He said, your industry, your company, your brand needs to lead the conversation with how are you saving the world?
Yeah.
And I took that to heart, and I'm seeing it reflected more and more in reality, in research, and in conversations with guys like you.
Yeah, it's interesting because I find that I'm gravitating toward clients and it's like growing up. The people who your friends are when you're in grade school are probably your neighbors, right? They're kind of forced upon you. That's where you live. And as you get older and you're exposed to more people and you have more options, you kind of gravitate to people who have similar thinking or simple, like understand each other in different ways. And for whatever reason now, it's interesting because now more than ever, well, I love the building material manufacturing space because it just makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's like between margins and budget. I've never met a building material manufacturer who says, I've got a ton of budget for marketing and we're going to go nuts. I've never, but I get that because that makes sense. We should be fiscally responsible and try to figure out how to drive a budget and figure out how to grow things. And like, I like that fight. So
Yeah.
maybe that's
But
why I focus on this industry the way I do.
yeah.
Because it's a great challenge, but you can get super sexy too. And there aren't many people doing that either. So it's not hard to be the pretty girl at the dance, but also there's another element to it. And on a serious note, it is building materials are changing the world we live in and possibly for the good or for the bad. And how they're manufactured and how they're made and wood in this case, as you're saying, gosh, I mean, looking at that, understanding that it's got to permeate it, even though a lot of companies who are manufacturers have so many different silos or different places it goes before it goes to an end user.
Yeah.
That story is it's so important that an end user understands it. And a manufacturer's responsibility in my mind is to create enough content to drive that information through their channels of distribution, help them sell, right? Mm-hmm. Differentiate and share who you are. And if that means also thinking about end-to-end target, and even though you don't do that and you don't think it's your responsibility to actually, sell the board, if you will, gosh, if you're creating the brand that explains why your board is harvested or how you're doing it and how it helps. Well, first of all, from an industry, Category Captain, which is, my favorite company to work with, they have to set that lead. And that's any really smart company. But gosh, I find myself more selfish. I find myself more and more attracted to this type of thinking of, and then what? How are you showcasing and sharing? How is it part of your brand, part of your conversation, as we talked about? And so share with us, what are some of the things that you're helping and providing these companies with that are tools and useful for agencies like me, clients like them to kind of express who they are and support some claims or some. Tell me how you guys are doing that.
Sure. So just to back up half a step, when you're talking about this industry not having hugely bloated marketing budgets and not renting helicopters or buying Super Bowl ads,
Yeah, right.
this is a very practical segment, right? The building industry as a whole.
Yeah, right.
And so, and for me, they've got an undiscovered story that's supported by research and common sense, and even when we all learned about photosynthesis in 6th grade or whenever that was, right? All of this adds up to a very simple climate positive sustainability story that no other category can tell. And it starts way back when about the 40s or the 50s, when the big lumber companies, when they were harvesting trees for lumber, siding, and flooring, half of that wood fiber was still left on the forest floor. And they decided, well, God, what can we turn this into? And, plywood, particle board, MDF, other composite wood materials. And suddenly we're using over 99% of the tree. And what I love about this industry is, they did not do this in 1950 so that they would have the category's best sustainability story in 2022.
Right.
They did it because they're practical, right?
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
cheap. These are managed resources, right? This is their raw material. They got to keep that healthy. They got to use as much as they can. They got to keep their plants running, right? So it's all very, I want to say, sort of industrial practical. But along the way, suddenly they own the only building material that has such a climate positive story. There's no other concrete, glass, steel, et cetera. Nobody else actually sequesters carbon. I mean, if you think about it, half the chemical makeup of a tree is captured carbon. So you can go up to a homeowner or to a building developer and say, hey, why don't you build your next kitchen out of 50% captured carbon? Oh, by the way, you're already doing it. Right? So helping them tell that story, though, even if, it's not like nobody's using particle board or MDF and we're going to try and take over the market. It's already being used. They just need to tell a better story to get some value out of those materials, do a better job of telling the value story of, when they add an engineered decorative surface like a laminate. Now you don't have to chop down walnut trees, right? I always say, let's leave the trees for things that we're going to love and treasure, like musical instruments.
I noticed that in the background, by the way. I'm going to ask you about that, but yeah.
Your designer you can afford is a frustrated musician. So, but anyway, so yeah, what I think this industry has an opportunity to, the engineered wood industry has an opportunity to incrementally increase its market share against things, some other building materials that might not be quite so climate or environmentally friendly. But most of all, they just have to own this story and share it far and wide. This is the only material that actually sequesters more carbon than is released in its production and use.
Have you seen anybody who's leveraged this story that you're talking about to grow share, quantifiably leverage the story?
It's just starting to happen, right? So this is a fairly new messaging concept. It's only been out there for about 4 months. Some of the major board producers are adding it to their own marketing, but where we're getting real movement is, I probably shouldn't mention any specific brands, but let's say there's one kitchen cabinet manufacturer in North America that makes 65,000 cabinets every day. They want to add this to their marketing. There's a big RTA furniture producer, flat pack furniture producer that wants to add it. There's a major office furniture manufacturer that wants to add it. And this is crazy, Eric, but it's not just for consumers, this messaging. Of course, it's very powerful. And some of these companies have competition that are doing a little bit better job on marketing sustainability. But what I'm hearing directly from these guys is we need this message for our boardroom, for our shareholders.
Yeah.
Right. We want this message so that we can, a unique and powerful sustainability message, so we can attract young people to this industry and keep them once they're here. So there are myriad reasons that I wasn't really anticipating when I launched this idea. But money talks, and being able to get people in your factory and your showrooms as employees is a big deal. So strangely enough, those are the things that are getting kind of the best traction in the early phases of this movement.
Well, I will say, I mean, I do the Constructing Brands podcast, and since January, we've probably had about 6, 8, 10 podcasts we've done. Various architects, designer. One just keeps coming to mind. A group called Iconica Design. I spoke with them, and their whole kind of premise is you don't know the furniture in your house. You don't know that, like, it's all about the environment,
Hmm.
and between off gassing and now as people who are working from home, and what your home office looks like, what all these things look like, are really kind of interesting and fairly critical in how options or choices are made, and then taking that to the next step, which is, what is the, what are the materials being used, and how are they affecting the environment in which we live. And so your story actually is probably speaking to so many different groups who are in a decision process, right? From people who
Hmm.
are specing a product. And so would you say you're in the education phase of this? Like, where are you at, and how are you pushing it forward, and how can people help you? Because I don't know
So
anybody who wants the planet to disappear.
yeah, well,
Um,
hopefully not. I don't know. There's some crazy things going on in Russia right now, but
yeah, well,
the idea that, um, and you know this from working with construction brands, education is the best marketing because there's always something new to learn. There's always a smarter way to do, specifying for buildings or engineering your construction methods and whatnot. So creating the continuing education unit content, CEUs. Everybody probably
mhm,
has some experience with that stuff.
yeah,
That is where a lot of the big suppliers are leaning in heavy, and because there's a demand for it. I was just talking to a major distributor of wood products in the Southeast yesterday. They are dying for more reasons to get in front of architects and designers. CEUs are a way to do that. But beyond that, and marketing guy to marketing guy, CEUs, once you spend the effort on creating this 6,000 word presentation that goes through several layers of approvals and finally, hopefully, gets blessed. I got a
mhm.
100% success rate on that front so far, by the way. But um, that amount of
Wait, I think
content,
I have an applause button here. Let me.
content that rocks, that's my slogan. Um, Once you've got that in hand, that is a gold mine for social media content, for sales training, for further marketing efforts, because first of all, it's approved CEU, right? So everything in there is the gospel now. Second of all, when you create a CEU, you have to get approved, it has to be not a sales piece. You can't have heavy brand recognition in there. You can't be saying our stuff is better than anybody else's stuff. But when you pull back from that, then you can turn it into more direct, beneficial marketing messaging. So to me, that is sort of the mothership where we get all this other content. The struggle is finding, on social media, how to dole that out in a way that
Mhm.
feels cohesive, still builds on a whole, and hopefully leads people to that company, and maybe even leads to requesting the CEU presentation for your firm.
So is there, so CEU is really the way in which you're looking at leveraging the messaging that helps drive the communication strategy that could filter through up, down, and sideways. I know that's kind of what you're saying, is that's your part of the
Yes.
picture.
Well, so yeah, CEUs very important, little dry, right? Because they have to be by nature. Case studies, if we're talking about communications here,
Yeah.
that is something my segment of the industry is really behind on.
Uh-huh.
It's something I've got a call with an architect in half an hour here, to talk about possible case studies. That is what really drives home the proof of performance
Love it.
connection that you can make with materials. That is what really sort of activates people's imaginations. Hey, they're doing projects of very much like what I'm doing, and this worked for them. So, and when I can, I weave case studies into a CEU. But Eric, that is like the hardest thing to get these companies to even help you figure out who's using their materials and in what application. Several case studies I've done, the most successful ones are I found by accident. I'm like, hey, this looks like your material I just saw in this hotel. Let's write
Right.
it up. And they're like, oh my God, they got that? We did not, no idea. So again, practical people, not marketing geniuses for the most part. That's why they hire people like you.
Well, one thing I really like about you is when we're speaking, your approach to looking at specifically what you're talking about. If climate positive composite wood, telling the story, understanding the bigger story or the way to position it, because you're right. I do really think about positioning. I think about what's the story we're telling. Like I was always telling stories as a kid. I still do it as an adult, and I love doing that. And I'm a storyteller, right? And I surround myself with people who create assets and have expert in different parts of how to get that story out, right? That's what we do. So with that said, I recognize you as being an expert in that process of helping develop a story, a position that could be weaved in with some other pieces. And the interesting thing is you've got if I'm getting it right, and please stop me if I'm wrong, but you've got a position of how it's almost like, they say, tide rises all ships, like there's that you're helping a segment of an industry that can really grow, and that everyone in that business will grow if they kind of think about how they could adopt and how they could take what their unique selling proposition, their USP, what they do really well, and incorporate you're part of that messaging. How do you incorporate that into their overall story? And I dig that you actually are thinking about the sound bites and the that are honest and true and that are vetted, and that guys like I could get fed and say, oh yeah, so that is interesting, and I see how what we're doing here and the way in which that sounds works with all the other things that make this client, because it's always everyone has a really good story if you're honest, truthful, and recognize that you can't tell every story. You just need to understand that story. And then you find people who want that story or that thing, and you found your target, right?
Yeah.
What you're doing is helping a category recognize that they need to integrate a piece of what you're doing into their story because they have it there and they're just not using it.
Yeah, it's just
Did
laying
I
there on
summarize that confusing enough? Or
yeah. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it just reminded me. I worked for a year at the beginning of the pandemic with a company that had been hired by Marriott hotels to develop a sustainable specification framework, which basically, boiling it all the way down, became sort of a database of pre-approved materials for all and products. We're talking even televisions and LED lighting and things like that. A database that Marriott design teams then can pick from, because it was very important for Marriott to be able to market the sustainability of their properties, because they did a study 5, 6, 7 years ago on a Marriott Courtyard. They had a QR code on a table tent in every room that said, find out what's green about this property. You scan the code, you read the story. The guests who interacted with that information had a 150% higher loyalty and satisfaction rate with Marriott, with Courtyard, versus people who stayed in the same hotel at the same time but did not get that story. So this framework was very interesting because it did assess, audit, analyze, and report on all of their individual green certifications, eco labels, whatever documentation they had, EPDs, HPDs, LCAs, alphabet soup. But what was really important to Marriott was the framework boiled all that information down to a score from 0 to 200 for the design teams to look at. So choose on score, and a couple of paragraphs that told the story about how that material, that product got that score. And what I quickly found out is that dossier became part of Marriott's marketing. So what that means is every stage in the value chain then is writing a chapter of the sustainability story that Marriott can tell to its guests and to its financiers. This is where I first heard, hey, when a developer goes for money, Morgan Stanley says, what's sustainable about this project first?
right.
Because they track projects over 10, 20 years and they realize projects with better sustainability stories have much higher ROI over the long term. So money talks. Finally, there's going to be some progress, right?
So, okay. So unpacking what we talked about, I think there's a lot there. So if you're a building material manufacturer and you're involved in any way with composite wood right now, you need to really get on the horn with Kenn, and he could share with you and talk to you about how maybe to tell how the story that you're presenting, climate positive, how it could be woven into their story as well. Is that a fair?
Yep. So under material intelligence, there are really two channels. The climate positive is the sustainability story of engineered wood. Composite wood, because of the density of the fibers, sequesters about twice as much carbon as solid wood. That's not saying solid wood is bad. And we're seeing more mass timber and building construction, right? So there's always a great story to be able to attach to wood, no matter how you're using it.
Right.
And the material intelligence side is actually the core of that website are material guides that compare these different decorative surfacing materials in a formatted way, so that if you are new to the industry or you're trying to find something fresh for a project, you can kind of do an apples to apples comparison of TFL, 3DL, other types of materials like that for interiors and furniture. So it's materialintelligence.com and climatepositivenow.org. I guess that's
where people can reach Kenn. And I recommend you reach out to him, because not only is he bright, but he's looking at it from so many different, what I appreciate so much is you're not just telling a story for an industry to understand and to be able to kind of use and educating people, but you're also helping a guy like me, who's a marketer who focuses on trying to help building material manufacturers with sound bites and with information that, quite frankly, is going to help if they fit within where you're going, help differentiate, and just another really strong tenet to the story that you tell about your brand to connect with your target, right? Whether it's an architect, a designer, an engineer, or even the end user who is enjoying that product and didn't even realize all that stuff. And now maybe, hey, that's great that you use that product. I feel good about myself, and I feel good about the environment right now, right? So
yeah, sustainability could be our best marketing story. It should be our best marketing story. And knowing how to tell this story proactively lets you control the conversation in a positive way, and make sure people take home, the ultimate benefits that we have to offer.
There you have it. I don't think I could end on a note that's stronger or to the point. Kenn, thank you so much for being a part of constructing brands. I appreciate you.
I'm honored, Eric. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Constructing Brands. Your feedback is how we thrive. So please leave us a rating and review on your favorite platform. And if you want access to even more great information, go to constructingbrands.com.